The air in the Seattle Grace Memorial Emergency Room was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the sterile sting of antiseptic. To most, it was a place of chaos, but for Harper Bennett, it was the only place that felt quiet enough to breathe. At 32 years old, Harper moved through the ward with a silence that unnerved her colleagues. Her eyes, dark and deep, looked like they had seen 100 years of history, even though she had only been at the hospital for 3 months. She was a nobody in the eyes of the prestigious surgical staff, a travel nurse who had appeared out of nowhere with a resume that looked intentionally thin and a demeanor that suggested she was afraid of her own shadow. While the senior nurses gossiped in the break room about their weekend plans, Harper was in the trenches. She did the grunt work that no one else wanted, cleaning bedpans, restocking saline drips, and mopping up the remains of lives that had been torn apart in the city's streets. She preferred the night shifts, the hours when the world was dark and the noise of civilian life finally faded away. "Bennett, move it," the voice boomed like a cannon shot through the trauma bay. It was Dr. Silas Preston, the chief of trauma surgery. Preston was 45, handsome in a way that he never let anyone forget, and possessed an ego so massive it barely fit through the hospital's double doors. He came from the Prestons of Connecticut, old money that had bought him his education and his arrogance. To him, the hospital staff weren't colleagues, they were his personal servants. Harper didn't flinch at his tone. She picked up a tray of sterilized instruments and walked toward Trauma Bay 4, where Preston was casually stitching a laceration on a drunk college student. "You're late," Preston sneered without looking up. "I asked for these 30 seconds ago. Do you have any idea what my time is worth, Bennett?" "Apologies, doctor," Harper replied. Her voice was low, flat, and completely devoid of emotion. Preston scoffed, snatching a hemostat from the tray. He deliberately brushed his hand against hers, then immediately wiped his glove on his gown as if she were a contagious disease. "Apologies don't save lives. Competence does. Try to acquire some," he spat. Behind the nurse's station, the other staff watched with a mixture of pity and relief. They were glad it wasn't them in the firing line today. "He's in a mood," whispered Chloe, a young nurse in bright pink scrubs. "Probably lost money on the stock market." "I don't know how Bennett takes it," David, the head charge nurse, sighed. "She has zero backbone. If he talked to me like that, I'd be at HR in minutes." "HR won't touch him," Chloe replied. "His dad is on the board. Bennett is just easy prey. She's like a ghost." But inside the supply closet a few moments later, Harper Bennett wasn't cowering. She leaned her forehead against the cool metal of the shelving unit and practiced a rhythmic breathing technique. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Her hands were steady. They were always steady. They had been steady when an RPG hit her convoy in the Korengal Valley. They had been steady when she had to pack the chest wound of her commanding officer while taking heavy fire from a ridgeline 300 meters away. She wasn't afraid of a man like Silas Preston. Men like him were soft. They broke the moment the air conditioning went out. Harper had survived things that would make Preston catatonic. Underneath her long-sleeved scrubs, which she wore even in the stifling heat to hide her shrapnel scars, was the soul of a major from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. She wasn't here for the glory or the paycheck. She was here to hide. After a classified mission in Syria went wrong, the military had medically discharged her. The psychologists said she needed a low-stress environment to reintegrate into civilian life. So she scrubbed floors and let an arrogant surgeon treat her like trash. It was all part of the mission. Blend in, don't engage. But the mission was about to change. "Bennett, get out here," Preston's roar echoed from the hallway again. "We have an incoming multi-trauma." Harper opened her eyes. The ghost was gone, and the steel returned to her gaze. She pushed off the shelf and walked back into the fray. Little did Dr. Preston know, He was seconds away from making the biggest mistake of his life. The sliding doors of the ER burst open with a violent crash, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop as the smell of copper, blood, and cold rain flooded the bay. A flurry of paramedics rushed in, their boots skidding on the linoleum as they pushed two gurneys through the crowded space. The incessant, piercing wail of the ambulance sirens still echoed in the hallway, adding to the sensory overload. Dr. Silas Preston took center stage immediately, puffing his chest out to command the room like a general on a battlefield. "Talk to me," he shouted, his eyes wide with the adrenaline rush he so desperately craved. Male, roughly 50, multiple gunshot wounds to the chest and abdomen, the lead paramedic yelled over the din of beeping monitors. "BP is crashing, 70 over 40, tachycardic. We lost his pulse twice on the way in." Preston didn't hesitate, his ego fueled by the crisis. "Bay 1, he ordered. "David, get a line in. Chloe, get the blood bank on the phone. Bennett," he spun around, pointing a gloved finger at Harper. "You're on suction, don't mess it up." Harper moved into position at the head of the bed, her movements fluid and economical. She looked down at the patient, and for the first time in years, her ironclad composure wavered. The man was built like a tank, with a graying beard and a face etched with the lines of a hard life. The paramedics had cut away his tactical vest, revealing a tattoo on his shoulder, a dagger with wings. Her heart skipped a beat. That wasn't just any tattoo, it was the insignia of the Special Forces. As she cleared the gore from his face, she recognized him. It was Master Sergeant Knox, Fort Knox, the man who had molded her into a soldier at Fort Bragg a decade ago. "He's crashing," David yelled, his voice cracking as the monitor shifted into a chaotic rhythm. "VFib paddles," Preston screamed. "Charge to 200. The room exploded into controlled chaos. While Preston prepared the paddles, Harper's eyes were locked on Knox's chest. She noticed something the golden boy surgeon was too blinded by his own theatrics to see. The blood in the trauma wound wasn't just pooling, it was bubbling with every shallow, gasping breath the man took. "Clear," Preston yelled, slamming the paddles onto Knox's chest. The body convulsed, but the monitor didn't change. "Still VFib," David reported, his forehead slick with sweat. "Charge to 300. "Doctor," Harper said. Her voice wasn't the timid whisper she usually used to blend into the shadows. It was firm, carrying the weight of a command. "Breath sounds are absent on the right. Trachea is deviated. It's a tension pneumothorax. Shocking him won't work. He needs a needle decompression now." The room went silent for a fraction of a second. Every nurse and intern turned to look at the quiet nurse who had just challenged the chief of trauma. Preston froze, his face reddening with a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. "Excuse me, are you a doctor now, Bennett?" he hissed, stepping away from the bed to loom over her. "Did you go to med school, or did you just get your degree from a cereal box?" "Look at the jugular distension, doctor," Harper insisted, her voice remaining calm as she pointed to Knox's neck. "The air is trapped. If you don't decompress the chest, he dies in 30 seconds. "Shut up," Preston roared, his ego finally snapping. "I am the attending surgeon here. You are a nurse. You change bedpans and you shut your mouth. Charge to 360, clear." He shocked Knox again. The monitor let out a flat, continuous tone. "Damn it," Preston threw the paddles onto the crash cart with a clang. "He's gone, call it." "No," Harper said. She didn't calculate the consequences. She didn't think about her low stress, reintegration, or her job. She simply moved. She stepped away from the suction unit and grabbed a 14-gauge angiocath needle from the open supply tray. "What do you think you're doing?" Preston stepped in front of her, physically blocking her path to the dying soldier. "Move," Harper said, her eyes turning into cold, dark tunnels. Get out of my trauma bay, Preston screamed, his spittle flying into the air. You are fired, get out. He has a pulsable rhythm, but the pressure is killing him, Harper said, stepping to the side to bypass him like he was nothing more than a training obstacle. I'm not letting him die because of your ego. That was the breaking point. Dr. Seelers Preston, a man who had never been told no in his entire life, lunged forward. He reached out and grabbed Harper by the back of her scrub cap, entangling his fingers in her hair and yanking her head back with violent, jarring force. I said, Preston hissed, his face inches from hers. Know your place, you worthless piece of trash. The violence of the motion sent Harper stumbling back against the metal cabinetry with a loud, ringing clang. The needle clattered to the floor. The entire ER stopped. Doctors froze mid-suture. Nurses dropped charts. The silence was absolute, heavy with the realization that a line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. Preston stood there, chest heaving, a triumphant snarl on his lips. He felt powerful. He expected Harper to crumble, to burst into tears and run out of the room sobbing. Slowly, Harper lowered her head. She reached up, adjusting her scrub cap with steady hands. When she looked back up, the quiet nurse was gone. In her place was Major Harper Bennett, and she was going to show Dr. Preston exactly what happens when you corner a ghost. The silence in the ER was so thick you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Dr. Seelers Preston stood there, a smug, sadistic grin playing on his lips, still holding the imaginary tension of the hair he had just yanked. He expected Harper to collapse. He expected her to be another victim of his golden boy status. But Harper Bennett didn't collapse. She didn't even blink. Slowly she adjusted her scrub cap, her movements hauntingly deliberate. The quiet nurse persona didn't just fade, it evaporated, leaving behind a woman whose presence suddenly filled the entire room. When she looked up at Preston, her eyes weren't filled with tears. They were filled with a predatory coldness that made the air in the room feel like ice. Doctor, she said, her voice dropping an octave, vibrating with a lethal authority, take your hands off me, now. Preston laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound. Or what? You'll report me. I own this board, Bennett. You're nothing. Security. He reached out again, intending to grab her arm and physically throw her out of the bay. It was the last mistake he would make that night. As Preston's hand closed in, Harper moved. To the untrained eye, it was a blur. She didn't punch him, she dismantled him. In one fluid motion, she caught his wrist in a C-grip, stepped into his guard, and used his own momentum against him. With a sharp twist of her hips and a precise application of pressure to the ulnar nerve, she sent the 200-pound surgeon flying. Preston hit the linoleum floor with a sickening thud, his breath leaving his lungs in a ragged gasp. Before he could even process the pain in his wrist, Harper was already turning back to the gurney. David, get me a fresh 14 gauge. Now, she barked. David, the charge nurse who had spent months thinking Harper was a pushover, didn't hesitate. The sheer command in her voice triggered a primal response. He slapped the needle into her hand. You bitch, Preston wheezed from the floor, clutching his arm. I'll have you arrested. I'll kill your career. Harper ignored him. Her world had narrowed down to the rising and falling, mostly falling, of Sergeant Knox's chest. She felt for the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Her fingers were like stone. She didn't need a local anesthetic. There wasn't time. She plunged the needle into Knox's chest. A loud, violent hiss of trapped air escaped the pleural space, the sound of a life being pulled back from the brink. Immediately, the frantic, flatlining monitor began to beep in a rhythmic, steady gallop. Knox's oxygen saturation numbers started climbing, 82, 88, 94. His BP is stabilizing, Chloe whispered. her eyes wide as she stared at the nobody nurse who had just performed a surgical procedure with the precision of a master. Harper didn't celebrate. She leaned down, her lips inches from Knox's ear. "Stay with me, Sarge. Major Bennett's got you. That's an order." Behind her, the ER doors swung open as two security guards rushed in, followed by the hospital's administrator, who had been alerted by the commotion. Preston was back on his feet now, his face a mask of purple rage, pointing a trembling finger at Harper. "There she is. Arrest her. She assaulted me. She's practicing medicine without a license. Look at her. She's insane," Preston screamed, his voice cracking. The guards moved toward Harper, but she didn't flinch. She stood her ground in front of Knox's bed, protecting her patient like a shield. She slowly rolled up her right sleeve, revealing the Night Stalker's tattoo, the winged dagger, and a row of jagged shrapnel scars that told a story of 100 battle sealers Preston couldn't even imagine. "I am Major Harper Bennett, 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment," she announced, her voice echoing off the sterile walls like a gavel. "This man is a United States Master Sergeant. Under the Good Samaritan law and the emergency medical protocols of this state, I intervened where a senior physician failed to provide life-saving care. And as for the assault..." She stepped toward Preston, who instinctively recoiled. "The security cameras in this bay are high definition, Doctor. They saw you put your hands on me first. They saw you pull my hair. In the military, we call that a loss of command. In the civilian world, it's just a felony." The administrator looked at the monitor, then at the bruised wrist of the chief of trauma, and finally at the calm, terrifyingly composed nurse. The power dynamic in the room didn't just shift, it shattered. "Security," the administrator said quietly, "please escort Dr. Preston to my office and call the police, not for the nurse, for him." Preston's mouth hung open. "You can't be serious, my father." "Your father isn't here, sealers," the administrator snapped, "but the legal department will be." As they led a sputtering, broken Preston away, Harper turned back to the monitors. Her hands were still steady, but as she looked at the silent, stunned faces of her coworkers, she knew her quiet life was over. The ghost had been summoned, and she wasn't going back into the shadows until the job was done. The aftermath of the confrontation in the ER felt like the vacuum after a bomb blast. While Master Sergeant Knox was being wheeled toward the intensive care unit, stabilized by the very hands Dr. Preston had tried to crush, the hospital's hierarchy was in a state of total collapse. Harper stood in the middle of the trauma bay, her scrubs stained with Knox's blood. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a statue of justice. Two local police officers had arrived, their radios crackling with static that seemed to mimic the tension in the room. They weren't there for Harper, they were there for the report filed by the hospital administrator. "Ma'am, we need you to come down to the precinct to give a formal statement regarding the physical assault," one officer said, his voice respectful but firm. "I'm not leaving my patient," Harper replied, her eyes never leaving the glass doors through which Knox had disappeared. "He's in good hands, Major," the administrator, Sarah Jenkins, said softly, "but Sealers Preston's father is already on the move. You need to get ahead of this." Harper knew she was right. Sterling Preston wasn't just a donor, he was a titan of the medical industry. By the time Harper reached the police station, the Preston machine was already in high gear. She wasn't greeted by a detective. She was met in an interrogation room by Charles Whitlock, a man whose suit cost more than Harper's annual salary and whose smile was as sharp as a scalpel. "Major Bennett," Whitlock began, sliding a thick leather folder across the table. "Or should I call you Nurse Bennett? Your records are interesting, highly classified, yet remarkably empty for the last 2 years." Harper sat perfectly still, She didn't touch the folder. Get to the point, Charles. Whitlock leaned in, his eyes cold. The point is simple. You assaulted a world-renowned surgeon. You practiced medicine without a license in a civilian facility. You violated a dozen hospital protocols. Dr. Preston is currently traumatized by your unprovoked outburst. He opened the folder to reveal a single sheet of paper. This is a non-disclosure agreement and a voluntary resignation of your nursing license. Sign it, leave the state, and the Preston family will ensure the criminal charges of assault and battery disappear. Refuse, and we will dig into your military past. We'll find out why a decorated major is hiding in a basement cleaning bedpans. We will make sure you spend the next 10 years in a federal penitentiary. Harper looked at the paper. It was a deal with the devil. If she signed, she would lose her ability to help people, the only thing that kept her nightmares at bay. If she didn't, the secret she had been protecting for 2 years, the truth about Operation Cinder, might be exposed, putting her former teammates in danger. You think you have leverage because you found a gap in my resume, Harper said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. You think I'm hiding because I'm ashamed. You're wrong. I'm hiding because when I'm on duty, people like your client tend to get hurt. Whitlock laughed. Threats won't work here, Major. You're in the civilian world now. Money and power rule here, not medals. Is that so? Harper asked. Suddenly, the heavy steel door of the interrogation room was thrown open so hard it dented the wall. A man in a crisp army service uniform, adorned with stars that practically blinded Whitlock, stepped inside. Counselor, I suggest you pick up your trash and leave, the man boomed. It was Lieutenant General Holloway, Harper's former commanding officer. Behind him stood 2 MPs, their faces carved from granite. Whitlock stood up, sputtering, Who are you? This is a private legal matter. You have no jurisdiction. I have jurisdiction wherever a United States officer is being coerced under duress, Holloway snapped. He looked at Harper, his eyes softening for a brief second. Major Bennett, why didn't you call the Pentagon? Your quiet period ended the moment you saved a master sergeant's life. I wanted to handle it myself, sir, Harper said, standing up and snapping a perfect salute. Well, the handling is over. Holloway turned back to Whitlock, who was now visibly trembling. You tell Sterling Preston that if he tries to touch Major Bennett's license, I will personally oversee a federal audit of his hospital's black files. We know about the botched surgeries his son covered up. We know about the payoffs. Whitlock scrambled to gather his papers. This isn't over. Actually, Harper said, leaning over the table, it's just beginning. Tell Sealers I'll be back at the hospital for my shift tonight, and he better stay out of my ER. As Whitlock fled, General Holloway turned to Harper. Major, they're going to come at you with everything. They won't just try to fire you, they'll try to destroy your name. Let them, Harper said, a grim smile touching her lips. I've been through fire before. A few rich men in suits don't scare me. The morning after the precinct showdown, Seattle Grace Memorial Hospital was no longer a place of healing. It was a fortress under siege. News vans with satellite dishes crowded the parking lot, their cameras pointed at the entrance like loaded weapons. Sterling Preston had made good on his threat. By 6:00 a.m., the headlines were screaming, Rogue nurse attacks top surgeon and violent veteran unstable in the ER. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere was toxic. Harper walked through the lobby, her head held high, ignoring the whispers and the fingers pointing from behind glass partitions. She wasn't wearing her quiet nurse mask anymore. Her stride was purposeful, her gaze sharp. She went straight to the staff locker room, but her keycard didn't work. The red light blinked, denied. Major, a voice whispered from the shadows of the hallway. It was David, the charge nurse. He looked tired, his eyes darting around to make sure they weren't being watched. They've locked you out of the system, Harper. Sterling Preston held an emergency board meeting at dawn. They've suspended you pending a psychiatric evaluation. Sealers is already back in his office, acting like a martyr with a wrist brace. Harper leaned against the wall, a cold smile touching her lips. He thinks he's won because he controls the locks. He's forgotten that I was trained to enter buildings that don't have doors. What are you going to do? David asked, his voice trembling. They're destroying your name on every news channel. Let them talk, Harper said. While they're busy with the cameras, they're leaving their flank exposed. David, I need you to do something dangerous. I need to get into the hospital's digital archives, the black files General Holloway mentioned. Every hospital has them, the settlements, the botched surgeries that were paid off, the complaints that were buried. David's face went pale. That's on a closed server in the basement. Only the chief of trauma and the chairman have access. If I help you, I'll lose my job. If you don't help me, Harper said, stepping closer, Sealers Preston will keep killing patients with his ego, and Sterling will keep buying their silence. How many more accidents can you watch, David? David looked at the floor, then back at Harper. He saw the scars on her arm, the winged dagger on her wrist, and the unwavering resolve in her eyes. Third floor service elevator, he whispered. The code is 4492. It bypasses the lobby security. I'll leave my terminal logged in for 5 minutes. That's all you get. Harper moved like a shadow. She didn't use the elevator. She used the stairwell, moving with a silent efficiency that would have been impossible for anyone without her training. She reached the server room in the basement, a cold, humming chamber of blue lights and whirring fans. She plugged a military-grade encrypted drive into the main terminal. On the screen, thousands of files flickered past. She searched for one name, Preston. The results were sickening. Dozens of malpractice suits settled out of court. A young girl who was paralyzed because Sealers was hungover during a spinal surgery. An elderly man who died because Sealers refused to admit he had nicked an artery. And at the bottom of the list, something even worse, evidence that Sterling Preston was skimming money from the hospital's charity fund to pay for his son's legal fixes. Suddenly, the lights in the server room turned from blue to a harsh, strobing red. Access denied, the computer screamed. Security alert, unauthorized entry. Damn it, Harper hissed, watching the progress bar, 88%, 91%. The heavy steel door of the server room hissed open. Standing there wasn't a security guard. It was Sealers Preston himself, holding a tablet and a smirk. Behind him were two men in dark suits, private security hired by the Preston family. You really are a glutton for punishment, Bennett, Sealers said, looking at her with pure, unadulterated hatred. Did you think we wouldn't see a login from David's terminal? You're not just a violent nurse now, you're a corporate spy. We're not just going to fire you, we're going to bury you. He gestured to the two men. Take her, and make sure she doesn't leave with that drive. Harper pulled the drive from the slot, 100% complete. She tucked it into her pocket and took a combat stance. I told you before, Sealers, you shouldn't have touched my hair, and you definitely shouldn't have cornered me in a dark room. The hum of the cooling fans in the basement server room felt like a low, vibrating growl as Harper tucked the encrypted drive into her pocket. Across from her, Sealers Preston stood framed in the doorway, his eyes gleaming with a mixture of fear and arrogance. The two men behind him, private security contractors, weren't hospital guards. They were fixers, built like brick walls and dressed in tactical black. Hand over the drive, Harper, Sealers sneered, his voice echoing off the metal server racks. You're already going to prison for assault. Don't add grand larceny and corporate espionage to the list. These men won't be as gentle as I was. Harper didn't waste breath on words. She shifted her weight, her boots gripping the cold floor. In her mind, she wasn't in a hospital basement. She was back in a narrow alley in Kandahar, cornered but dangerous. Last chance, Sealers warned. The first guard lunged. He was fast, reaching for a stun baton on his belt. Harper didn't wait for him to draw it. She stepped inside his reach, using a palm strike to his solar plexus that sent him stumbling back into a rack of blinking servers. Before the second guard could react, she spun, using the momentum of the first strike to deliver a roundhouse kick that caught the man squarely in the jaw. The room erupted into a blur of motion. The first guard recovered, swinging a heavy fist. Harper ducked, the air from the punch whistling over her ear. She grabbed his arm, using a joint lock technique that sent a surge of agonizing pain through his elbow. With a sharp crack, the man went down, his arm pinned behind his back in a way that made him scream. "Get her," Sealers screamed from the safety of the doorway, his hands trembling as he realized his muscle was being dismantled by a woman half their size. The second guard, now desperate, pulled a collapsible baton and swung wildly. Harper used a metal server tray as a makeshift shield, the clang of the impact ringing through the room. She didn't fight like a civilian. She fought with the brutal efficiency of the 160th saw. She targeted nerves, joints, and soft tissue. A quick strike to the perineal nerve in the guard's leg caused his knee to buckle, and a follow-up elbow to the temple finished the job. Both men were on the floor, not dead, but definitely out of the fight. Harper turned her gaze toward Sealers. The golden boy turned pale. He reached into his lab coat and pulled out a small, snub-nosed revolver. "Don't move. I'll kill you. I'll tell the police you attacked me again." "You're shaking, Sealers," Harper said, her voice eerily calm as she walked toward him. "You've never pulled a trigger in your life. You've only ever used a scalpel to hurt people who couldn't fight back. Stay back. That gun has a 6-pound trigger pull," Harper continued, her footsteps steady. "By the time your brain sends the signal to your finger, I'll have already broken your windpipe. Do you want to find out if I'm lying?" Sealers looked into her eyes and saw a void, a darkness that had been forged in the fires of actual war. He realized then that he wasn't dealing with a nurse. He was dealing with a weapon. His hand shook so violently that the gun clattered to the floor. He turned and bolted, his footsteps echoing down the hallway in a panicked rhythm. Harper didn't chase him. She didn't need to. She had the drive, and Sealers had just proven his guilt on the server room's internal security cameras. She picked up the gun, cleared the chamber with a practiced flick of her wrist, and tucked it into her waistband. She had 5 minutes before the main security team arrived. She needed to get to the one person Sealers couldn't buy, Master Sergeant Knox. She knew Sealers would head straight for the ICU. In his twisted mind, if he could finish what he started with Knox, by sabotaging his recovery, he could eliminate the star witness of his incompetence. Harper reached the service elevator and punched the code for the ICU floor. As the doors closed, she felt the weight of the drive in her pocket. It contained enough evidence to bring down the Preston Empire, but first, she had to ensure her friend lived to see the sunrise. "Hang on, Knox," she whispered to the empty elevator. "The cavalry is coming." The ICU was a cathedral of glass and humming machinery, a stark contrast to the brutalist chaos of the basement. Harper stepped off the elevator, her heart hammering against her ribs, not from fear, but from the cold, focused adrenaline of a soldier entering the final phase of an operation. She saw him through the glass of room 302. Dr. Sealers Preston was standing over Master Sergeant Knox's bed. He wasn't wearing his white coat anymore. It was crumpled on the floor. His face was a mask of frantic desperation. He was fumbling with the IV pump, his hands shaking as he tried to override the dosage settings. "Step away from the pump, Sealers," Harper said, her voice cutting through the rhythmic beeping of the monitors like a blade. Sealers jumped, nearly knocking over a tray of instruments. He spun around, clutching a syringe filled with an unidentified clear liquid. You shouldn't be here. You're a trespasser. I'm the chief of trauma. I'm adjusting his sedation. You're trying to kill the only witness who can prove you ignored a tension pneumothorax, Harper said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. She didn't rush him. She moved with a slow, predatory confidence. That syringe in your hand, is it potassium chloride? A little cardiac arrest to solve your problems. He's going to die anyway, Sealers shrieked, his voice cracking. My father, he built this place. He built me. I won't let a nobody like you take it all away because of one mistake. It wasn't one mistake, Sealers. I have the drive. She patted her pocket. I saw the black files. I saw the girl you paralyzed. I saw the settlements. You're not a doctor. You're a butcher with a trust fund. Sealers lunged, not at Harper, but at Knox's IV port, needle poised to plunge the lethal dose into the line. Harper didn't hesitate. She grabbed a heavy medical monitor from the bedside stand and swung. It didn't hit Sealers, it hit the IV pole, knocking it back and sending the syringe flying across the room. Before Sealers could recover, Harper had him pinned against the glass wall. She didn't use her fists this time. She pressed her forearm against his throat, just enough to restrict his breath, and stared directly into his panicked eyes. The man in that bed saved my life in a valley you can't even pronounce, Harper whispered, her voice a terrifying growl. You yanking my hair was a mistake, but trying to hurt him, that's a death sentence. Suddenly, the ICU doors hissed open. It wasn't security. It was Sterling Preston, followed by the hospital's board of directors and a group of grim-faced men in dark suits. Sealers, drop it, Sterling barked, but he wasn't looking at his son with concern. He was looking at the tablet in his hand, which was streaming a live feed. Father, help me, she's trying to kill me, Sealers cried out. Shut up, you fool, Sterling roared. He turned to Harper, his face a pale shade of grey. Major Bennett, or whatever your name is, we need to talk, privately. We're past talking, Sterling, Harper said, releasing Sealers, who slumped to the floor sobbing. She pulled the encrypted drive from her pocket and held it up. While you were busy trying to frame me in the media, I was uploading the contents of your black files to a secure server at the Department of Justice. General Holloway has the decryption key. The board members gasped. One of them, an elderly woman who had been a donor for 30 years, looked at the files on her own phone. The leaked documents were already hitting the internal network. You've destroyed us, Sterling whispered, his empire crumbling in real time. The hospital, the family name, everything. No, Harper corrected him, looking over at Knox, whose chest was rising and falling in a healthy, steady rhythm. I saved the hospital. I just destroyed the cancer that was eating it from the inside. As if on cue, the doors opened again. This time, it was the state police. They didn't go for Harper. They walked straight to Sealers and Sterling Preston. Sterling Preston, Sealers Preston, you are under arrest for medical fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder, the lead officer announced. As they were led away in handcuffs, the ICU became quiet again. The ghost stood by the bed of her old friend. Knox's eyes fluttered open, catching the light. He looked at Harper, recognized her, and gave a weak, barely visible thumb up. Harper finally let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 10 years. She reached down and took Knox's hand. Rest up, Sarge, she whispered. The war is over. The fallout from the arrest of Sterling and Sealers Preston was like a tidal wave hitting the medical world. Within 48 hours, the board of Seattle Grace Memorial had been dissolved, and a federal task force was deep in the archives, unearthing years of systemic corruption. But inside the hospital walls, the atmosphere had shifted from toxic fear to a strange, hushed reverence. Harper Bennett didn't take a leave of absence. She didn't go on a press tour, despite the dozens of news crews begging for an interview with the hero nurse. Instead, 48 hours after the showdown in the ICU, she showed up for her 7:00 p.m. shift, just like any other night. As she walked through the lobby, the silence followed her, but it was different now. It wasn't the silence of being ignored, it was the silence of respect. When she reached the nurse's station, David was there, along with Chloe and a dozen other staff members. "Major," David said, his voice thick with emotion. He didn't call her Harper, he didn't call her the new girl. He gave her a sharp, crisp salute, one he had clearly been practicing. Harper looked at him, then at the rest of the staff. For the first time in 3 months, she smiled. It wasn't a wide grin, but it was enough to break the ice. "The saline drips won't restock themselves, David. Let's get to work." She spent the first hour of her shift in the ICU. Master Sergeant Knox was awake, sitting up and breathing without the help of a machine. His recovery was being called a miracle by the new surgical team, but Harper knew better. It was the result of a soldier's will to live and a nurse's refusal to let him go. "I heard you took down the chief of trauma with a medical monitor," Knox rasped, his voice still gravelly but strong. "He was in the way, Sarge," Harper replied, checking his vitals. "You haven't changed, Bennett," Knox chuckled, then winced at the pain in his chest. "Always protecting the flank. The army was a fool to let you go." "I think I found a new mission," Harper said, looking out at the busy ER floor. "Turns out, civilians need Night Stalkers just as much as the guys in the sand." The story of Harper Bennett reminds us that true strength isn't about a title on a door, the size of a paycheck, or the influence of a family name. It's about what you do when the world is watching, and more importantly, what you do when it isn't. Dr. Silas Preston thought his status made him a god. He learned the hard way that you never judge a person by the floor they mop, especially if that person has walked through fire to be there. Harper didn't just save Knox's life that night. She saved the soul of a hospital that had forgotten its purpose. She proved that one person, standing firm in the truth, can bring down an empire built on lies. As the sun began to rise over Seattle, Harper stood at the ambulance bay, watching a new day begin. She tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, hair that no one would ever dare pull again, and adjusted her stethoscope. She was no longer a ghost hiding in the shadows. She was a guardian. And at Seattle Grace, the night shifts would never be the same again. Call to action. Did you enjoy this 8-part journey into the life of Major Harper Bennett? This story is a powerful reminder that heroes are often hidden in plain sight, doing the work no one else wants to do. If you are moved by Harper's courage, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel reach more people who need to hear stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss our next long-form cinematic story. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in Harper's shoes? Would you have stayed quiet, or would you have risked everything to do what was right? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, stay brave, and I'll see you in the next story.